Extract from the Prelude by William Wordsworth tells a true story from Wordsworth's own childhood. It takes place in the Lake District, an area of northwest England famous for its lakes, forests and mountains. The poem describes the poet as a young boy stealing a rowing boat and rowing across Ullswater Lake. Wordsworth, led by nature, which is personified in the poem as her, finds a boat chained up, undoes the chain, gets in and pushes off onto the lake. Proud of his skill, he rows the boat, feeling powerful and delighted with himself. But all this is about to change. As he rows, Wordsworth fixes his eyes on a huge mountain that springs into view. Terrified, he turns and rows back to the shore, harassed for days by the memory of the event. Let me just point out, this video is a quick recap of the poem. To learn more, watch my full analysis, which I'll link at the end. William Wordsworth was one of the Romantic poets, as were William Blake, who wrote London, and Percy Shelley, who wrote Ozymandias. Romantic poetry was a poetic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. There are many conventions to Romantic poetry, but the one which is key for this poem is a dislike of urban life and embrace of the natural world. So let's begin by looking at how the speaker thinks he's powerful in the opening lines of the poem. Firstly, Wordsworth describes taking the boat as an act of stealth. The word stealth has a connotation of being both sneaky and sly. There is no doubt that the action is morally wrong, but the speaker seems to feel no sense of this. He is selfish, taking whatever he wants with no thought of the consequences. The poet's use of positive imagery presents his sense of power whilst rowing. Circles glittering and sparkling light give a magical, almost celestial quality to the moment. We can see that the poet's ego and sense of power is growing from the way his description of the boat changes. What began on line 2 as a little boat is described on line 17 as an elfin pinnace. A pinnace is a light sailing ship, and the adjective elfin imbues a sense of magic to the scene. The poet is feeling all-powerful, as if he's the hero of some mythical story. The simile heaving through the water like a swan adds to this sense of power. The opening of the poem, then, is rich in imagery and figurative language, all suggesting the speaker's sense of power. But then things change. The speaker describes how a huge peak, black and huge, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. The shift in language usage is extremely important here. The poet's previous use of figurative and expressive language has deserted him. Only a few lines before, the elfin pinnace moved like a swan. Now the speaker's in such a state of shock that he regresses to a simplistic definition of what he sees before him, a huge peak, black and huge. The repetition of huge is notable. If a student wrote this line in a piece of creative writing, their teacher might well suggest that they replace one use of huge with a different word. The repetition means it's clunky and doesn't read or flow well like the previous parts of the poem did, and this is deliberate repetition for effect on the part of Wordsworth. The speaker's confidence, pride and vocabulary have left him. The structural shift in language usage highlights the impact the mountain has on the speaker. It's drained him of all sense of power. He's realised in an instant that humans are not powerful. Nature is truly powerful. The poem is structured as one long stanza. There are numerous possible reasons for this, and I look at a number of them in my longer video on the poem, but here let's just look at one idea. When we read the whole poem aloud with no major breaks or pauses, we're overwhelmed by the immensity of the poem. This overwhelming aspect reflects how young Wordsworth himself was overwhelmed by his experience with nature. This is reinforced by another structural feature, enjomment. Enjomment is the continuation of a sentence beyond the end of a line. The first sentence of the poem flows over the first 3 lines. Enjomment can be used to suggest an overpowering urge to communicate, an inability to stop and order your thoughts into a coherent and ordered structure. Much like the fact that the poem consists of one long stanza with no breaks, the enjomment adds to the sense of the overwhelming effect nature has upon the speaker. The repetition of no in no familiar shapes remained, no pleasant images of trees, of sea or sky, no colours of green fields, shows how the speaker's pride from the opening lines has vanished. Not only is he now not confident of what he knows, he can only explain things in terms of what he does not know, hence the repetition of the word no. So in terms of power and conflict, the poem shows us a speaker with misguided notions of human power. He learns the lesson that nature is truly powerful. With that in mind, which poems compare well with Extract from the Prelude? While in terms of misguided notions of human power, Ozymandias, My Last Duchess, Kamikaze, and Tissue are perhaps the most obvious picks. In terms of the power of nature, you might look at Kamikaze, Storm on the Island, Exposure, and Tissue. But which other poems would you compare it with, and why? Put your comments in the comments section. For more on this poem, pick up a copy of Mr. Bruff's Guide to Power and Conflict Poetry, available exclusively in ebook form and linked in the description. If you like this shorter style of analysis video, do give it a thumbs up and I'll make some more. But remember, this video isn't intended to tell you everything you need to know about the poem, it's a recap. For the full lesson, check out the video linked here on screen. Thanks for watching.